Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. Well, today on the show, we're going to talk a little about how to fix saline soils once and for all. If you've got a saline issue, you know what a problem this can be. And yes, it's going to take some time, but we'll give you the steps you need to take on your farm to alleviate this problem.
Now, one other thing we want to do today is just review 2020. What are some of the things that really impacted the farms this year? And what are some things you can learn from that going forward?
We've got a Weed of the Week coming up later in the show and Iron Talk as well. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Your soybeans are in the bin, but the game isn't over yet. Score more points this year by taking your beans to the end zone. At $10 beans, every point of moisture below your target takes away 15 cents per bushel. Reclaim that lost yield with the end zone bin system from Farm Shop MFG.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about liquid versus dry fertilizer.
When it comes to delivering plant food for any plant out there, whether it's in your garden, your lawn, or a crop, fertilizer, that's what plant nutrition is. And there are a lot of different forms of fertilizer that you could use depending on what kind of equipment you have to apply it to your crop. For example, if you have a dry spinner spreader available to put on your lawn fertilizer, you're probably not thinking about liquid fertilizer in a lawn situation. It's, hey, I've got a spreader, so I can do that. It's the same thing on farms. Some farmers have sprayers, but they don't have dry spreaders, so they may be more inclined to use liquid fertilizer.
They might, but let's face it, what we're really talking about here for the farm, because it's a big scale, is not the same thing as we'd be talking about for a lawn or a garden. What farmers are more interested in is two things. Number one is cost. Number two is availability. And what I mean by availability is if I put that fertilizer on for my crop, will my crop absorb it? Whether I'm putting it in furrow, and by in furrow, what we mean there is right along with the seed. Am I going to put it near the seed, or am I going to spray it over the top of a growing crop? So availability has an awful lot to do with which product I'm going to pick, liquid or dry.
Well, certainly, and farmers are looking at their soil as, well, is this a soil that's really built up in fertility and I can always raise good crops? Or is this kind of a poor soil that has been run down or just never really had much fertility over time? So farmers are also looking at, is that fertility going to help me long term, or is it something that's just going to impact this year's crop?
All right, so in terms of the dry fertilizer, that is not going to be available immediately when it's spread because it's still dry. It's going to have to break down, and that's going to take moisture and it's going to take heat. If you don't have moisture and you don't have heat, well, guess what? That fertilizer is not doing you a whole lot of good. It's just going to be sitting out there. Liquid, on the other hand, is already set to go. It is ready as soon as a plant root might hit it. So that is worth some money. And it's worth a lot of money if it's something that is needed very early in the season. Darren brought up, hey, if my ground is low on fertility, well, I know I'm going to need lots of nutrients out of the fertilizer I apply right now. That's where the liquid really seems to pay.
Well, here's one of the challenges, though, is that a lot of the fertility that we're putting out is actually salt. When you think about potassium,
all fertilizer
for example,
is salt.
You're looking at potassium chloride in many cases. Well, I want the potassium. I may or may not want a whole bunch of chloride, but that's how it's getting delivered. So when you're putting out a salt, you do have to be careful about when and where you place that around your plants.
And that's where there's a big difference in the dries and the liquids. But as a general statement, I will just say if we're trying to avoid high levels of salt, number one, we cut the rate. And number two, we switch products. There are a lot of very low salt liquid products. We use a lot of agro liquid fertilizer on our farm, for example, and that's the reason why. We use that to help feed the crop. We use that with the planter. We use the dry fertilizer because it's cheaper, but we use that in the fall. We'll spread it on more of a broadcast basis, sometimes in a band, but we're trying to build the soil more with that. So feeding the crop and having something available quick, liquid's great. If you have to build, and you really have to build lots and lots and lots of pounds, that's where the dry is often the choice of farmers because it's less expensive.
Almost every essential nutrient that your crops need or your plants need can be found in a liquid form or a dry form. That's what we're talking about, liquid fertilizer or dry fertilizer. Either way, you can feed your plants.
Well, you can also find herbicides in liquid or dry. We'll tell you which herbicides will stop our Weed of the Week coming up later in the show.
Pentair Hypro 3D nozzles are your premier choice for fungicide applications. Syngenta fungicide application field trials have shown Hypro 3D nozzles provide a yield advantage of up to 10% over other nozzles, maximizing the return on your fungicide investment. Learn more at pentair.com/hypro.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whenever you want. In your life and on your farm, Case IH AFS Connect gives you more control. Monitor your operation, manage your fleet and your farm data your way. Case IH. Rethink productivity.
Success isn't just about maintaining your operation, how you make out for the season, or how much you can get from each acre. It's about doing precisely what needs to be done to feed your crop and grow your legacy, all the way down to the last drop. AgroLiquid Precision Crop Nutrition. Apply less, expect more. Find a retailer at agroliquid.com.
Across the country and across county lines, no two operations are the same. So to keep your yield potential up and your fields clean, you need flexibility. Extend Flex soybeans, the industry's first soybean with triple tolerance to dicamba, glyphosate, and now glufosinate, giving you the yield you want and the choice you need. Extend Flex soybeans.
When you apply phosphate fertilizer, it binds to calcium in the soil, becoming calcium phosphate, essentially tooth enamel. How much of this tooth do you think will become available to your crop? NutriCharge doubles your phosphate availability by protecting it from calcium fixation.
What I look for in a seed isn't just in the seed.
It's people I trust who get me the solve without the sell.
Who show me where their seed fits and even where it doesn't.
Because the only innovation that matters is the one I need.
With NK Seeds, progress means pushing my potential.
And success matters.
Nature called. It wants its nutrients back. Don't flush them away. Use it where it's needed, precisely. Topcon has nutrient management technology to help make this process easier. How can you take advantage of this? Let us show you.
Today we're going to talk about how to fix a saline soil. Let's first talk about what is a saline soil. Well, really all it is where you have excess salt. So right on your soil test, you can look at the salt level that you have there, or soluble salts, and when you see that number high, well, you've got an issue. What this usually stems to is a poor drainage situation. So let's talk through the steps that we would suggest you take to fix this problem.
First of all, saline soils don't happen overnight. It's a long-term thing, and we just want to get expectations right here that yes, you're going to make the next right decision for your farm and for that area of the farm, but don't expect we're going to turn everything around in a real hurry. It's going to take a little bit of time. Now, you may say, well, this problem has developed over 30 or 40 years on this farm. It's not going to necessarily take 30 or 40 years to get it fixed, but it is going to take a little bit of time. So let's start with the next best step.
All right, so what it usually is, like I said already, is a drainage problem. You've got to fix that drainage. Now, let's say you have a U.S. Fish and Wildlife wetland easement out on your ground and you say, well, I can't tile, so I'm just going to do surface drainage, and I can't even do all the surface drainage I want to do. All right, two things here. First, U.S. Fish and Wildlife easements, they do not include your entire field. If you've got a quarter section, it might only be 2 acres that you have to avoid. It might be 5 acres, but you've got to find the original maps. You can talk to a lawyer if you need the lawyer to talk to Fish and Wildlife for you, but you can tile through most of your field. That's the first thing I'll tell you. The second thing is, tile is where this is at. You're not going to solve your saline problem by taking care of surface water drainage issues. Okay, that's not what this is all about. Saline issues build up because of poor subsoil drainage. So you've got to take care of that by putting drain tile in. Yes, it's nice when you have a little less standing water on the field, I get it, but the faster you get water off your field, keep in mind, the more erosion you're going to have. So there is a downside, there is a consequence to having faster surface drainage.
One thing we should also mention, when it comes to chemical changes that we need to make in the soil, you really need to start with good soil testing so you can see exactly where the nutrient levels are in your soil. There are definitely some that are out of whack when it comes to a saline soil that we need to address. And we also need to know what the strengths are in that field. So make sure you pull a complete soil analysis for those areas of the field. Now, if you've been pulling a couple of samples per field, yet you have this saline area that's only in a small part of the field, don't do that. Don't blend everything together. Get samples specifically out of those areas so we can address them the best way.
Okay, where Darren's going with this is you need high levels of calcium. We want calcium to be at least 65% on your base saturation test. If it's below that, you may need to add some more calcium out to your field, because drainage is about two things. Number one, do I have tile below ground so the water can get away? And two, do I have enough calcium so water can flow through my soil very well? If your magnesium percentage is super high, let's just say, then it's very possible that before the water ever even gets down to your tile, and when the water's hung up, your salt is hung up too. But with magnesium, this can be a real issue because those particle sizes are so small with the magnesium that it will prevent everything from moving down to the tile. So get your calcium level up, make sure you have good tile drainage out there. And yes, the amount of tile you need in your field may vary from one area to the next. If you've got very heavy soil and a lot of this saline issue in one part of the field, you might have to have tile every 20 feet. But in other areas, it might be 70 feet apart is plenty good enough. So just keep in mind, you've got to fix that drainage internally in your soil down below the ground. So that means tile, and that means good levels of calcium.
And it's going to be tough to get things to grow in these areas of the farm. And there's a lot of reasons why. One, your pH is out of whack, your nutrient balance is out of whack, and now that means it's not a great environment for soil microbes. And soil microbes are so critical for getting good growth of any crop that you're going to put out there. So you may start adding microbes into the situation. You may add other nutrients, as Brian has already mentioned, into the situation. And you may also add some residue out into that. If you can't get anything to grow, I've seen people incorporate bales out in there and different things just to try to get some organic material out in the soil to give some food for the microbes to try and get things to start.
The one good thing I will say is a saline issue is much, much, much easier than a sodic issue to fix. With sodic soil, we have to take that excess sodium and turn it into a salt before we can get it leached out of the ground. With a saline issue, keep in mind salts are leachable. They will go away if you just simply have good drainage. So when you have natural rainfall or irrigation, then you can flush that out of the ground. Now, as I mentioned, irrigation. You've got to look at your water. If you're having an issue with saline and you don't have a major drainage problem, what that's telling me, if it's an irrigation situation, that, hey, maybe my water is not the best. Maybe look at what's your water quality and how are you doing out there. It could also be excess manure or something like that. So look at what you are putting onto the ground, whether it's water, manure, whatever other kind of fertilizer, and see if that's causing some of the problem as well.
Well, one other problem you may see out in your fields is our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?
I don't so much worry about how much I spend, I worry about the return on my investment. I've tried so many things to try to be better and try to increase profitability, and I finally felt like I hit a home run. The Soil Warrior has enabled me to decrease hours on tractors by running 2 trips in 1 pass at high speeds, and my fuel savings has been tremendous.
Norwood Sales wanted a female farm owner to supply a different perspective on yield-track planters, so here goes. It has a simple elegance with very practical styling, using weather shields to protect electronics and to organize equipment, giving a fit and finish that is unmatched in the industry. But what really excites me is yield-track's productivity, like widening my planting window by 20%, ease and speed of folding, being able to do end-of-row turns in just 6 seconds, operating 1 to 2 miles per hour faster with no impact on seed spacing or uniform depth, and being able to road transport at 20 miles per hour. Of course, being a bargain shopper, I love it. These tracks pay for themselves in incremental yield on just 1,600 acres at $3 corn. Okay, and yes, I do think that the yield track is cute. Now get over it and call Norwood Sales to learn more.
Maintaining your crops is as important now as it's ever been. Howler, a revolutionary fungicide from AgBiome, can help. It provides long-lasting protection from a broad spectrum of foliar and soil diseases that affect crops. Howler is OMRI listed, has multiple modes of action, and has minimal pre-harvest and re-entry intervals. It's flexible, easy to use, and is available right now. Visit agbiome.com/howler to learn more.
Success isn't just about maintaining your operation, how you make out for the season, or how much you can get from each acre. It's about doing precisely what needs to be done to feed your crop and grow your legacy, all the way down to the last drop. AgroLiquid Precision Crop Nutrition. Apply less, expect more. Find a retailer at agroliquid.com.
Nature called. It wants its nutrients back. Don't flush them away. Use it where it's needed, precisely. TopCon has nutrient management technology to help make this process easier. How can you take advantage of this? Let us show you.
Most everyone I talk to is very happy that 2020 is coming to a close, but I don't want to let it pass without learning some lessons from it that could help us on the farm.
Okay, let's start with this. 2020 was a rough year on a lot of farms. There was still a lot of prevent plant in certain areas of the United States. Ethanol plants closed down because gasoline demand went down due to COVID. We saw yields all over the board in certain areas of the country. We had extreme drought. We had very high winds. We had all kinds of issues, but then there were also some record yields in certain pockets. So there was a lot of good, but also a lot of bad.
So let's look at some of the lessons that we learned along the way here. First of all, let's talk about diseases in corn. Now this year, in many areas where it was dry, disease wasn't a big challenge, but in other areas it did get some rainfall. We saw continued growth and spread of physoderma and tar spot in corn. Those two are becoming big issues, big enough now that they've caught the attention of corn breeders and corn breeding programs. They're working really hard to get hybrids with improved tolerance or even resistance to those diseases. So if you're looking at 2021, these are a couple more questions you add to your list when you're talking to your seed corn dealer. Hey, how does it do on tar spot? How does it do on physoderma if those are issues in your area?
All right, switching to soybeans, what I learned is enlist yields really well. XtendFlex got approved, and we have seen a lot of XtendFlex out there. It looks pretty good, so I'm super excited about both of those traits. I'm not very excited about the whole dicamba thing though, because there was more dicamba drift in my region than I have seen ever before. A lot of soybeans got dinged up from dicamba, so we have to be even more careful with dicamba and maybe just flat out spray it so much earlier in the growing season. As an agronomist, that'll be my recommendation to many farmers I work with in 2021.
One other thing in soybeans, and speaking about early, there's a lot of early planting this year, and there are a lot of compaction and drainage issues that didn't get dealt with, and that led to more sudden death syndrome in soybeans than I've seen in a while. Now, another thing that contributed to this is there were a lot of new enlist soybeans out there, and just a lot of guys who weren't aware that sudden death syndrome could be a problem, and so they weren't really looking at that for a defensive trait that they needed for their farms. We saw sudden death syndrome all the way up into the Red River Valley of North Dakota and northern Minnesota. I haven't seen STS that far north before. So if you're in a soybean growing area, make sure you're asking about sudden death syndrome tolerance, especially in these new enlist and XtendFlex varieties, because hey, they've got some pretty good yield to them, but some of them are lacking a few of the defensive traits that we'll see coming in the next class of products for 2022 and beyond. So ask about that, and then look at some of the new seed treatments like Saltro or proven ones like Olivo that can help you and protect your crop against sudden death syndrome.
One of the big things we saw in 2020 was a lot of antagonism out there, especially with the volunteer corn herbicides. So the great thing, if you wanted to kill volunteer corn and soybeans over the last few years, you spend $2 on Secure or Assure or Fusilade, something like that. They're all great. A lot of people go clethodim. I don't like clethodim. It's not nearly as good on volunteer corn, but what we found is Fusilade and Secure and even clethodim have major antagonism with 2,4-D and some antagonism with dicamba. So if you're going to just go spray those volunteer corn herbicides with Roundup, fine, use the low rate, no big deal. If you're going to mix them with dicamba and especially 2,4-D, you've got to up the rate.
Well, one other thing we saw in 2020, Brian, was a lot of farmers using some products they hadn't used before, switching from one brand to the other due to some massive rebate programs that were out there, like the Bayer Plus program, for example, was absolutely huge. That was by far the biggest one across the United States. And what happened is when they tied in additional products that farmers may or may not have been using, we saw more fungicide use in some areas, and we saw guys doing a few extra steps. That really played into how the results were for yields in 2020. Some of the yields were surprisingly good in areas that they weren't expected to be that good. And I think in 2021 we'll see that program continue, and we'll see guys that just tried fungicide use and other things that were new for their farm for the first time continuing on and maybe even using more.
As we go into 2021, there's a lot of good news, everything from lower interest rates, lower input costs. We hope that 2021 is a much better year than 2020. We'll see what ends up happening as we move forward, but just understand we are here to help you all along the way at Ag PhD.
Well, one other thing we can help you with is controlling our Weed of the Week. We'll show you how coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Our Weed of the Week is yellow toadflax that, Darren, it's apparently also known as butter and eggs.
Well, I like butter and I like eggs, but I don't like yellow toadflax because it does contain toxins in it that can hurt animals if consumed in sufficient quantities. Other than sheep and goats apparently can graze this and don't normally have any problems.
All right, so perennial weed, how are you going to get this thing under control? My best suggestion is where you can, simply spray Roundup. Now in pasture situations, I'd probably go with Toradon. There are a number of different ALS herbicides that can work as well. And certainly if you want to just go out there with a really strong rate of 2,4-D or dicamba to burn down the top growth, you can, but Roundup and Toradon are going to be much better at getting down into the root system and killing it permanently.
And here's the big thing. It can be toxic, but it also competes very well against native plants for water. Well, all of a sudden, if your animals aren't going to graze it, or if they do graze it, it hurts them, and it's taking away the water and nutrition that your pasture really needs or your grass area really needs. Boy, it's just a no-brainer that you've got to stop this weed. That's not the environment it needs to grow in.
Well, once again, our Weed of the Week is yellow toadflax or butter and eggs. And that's all the time we've got for this week's weed, but stay tuned, Iron Talk is coming up next.
Who says harvest should be the only rewarding part of the season? Sure, ending a successful year of planning and planting is a very gratifying moment. But with the Bayer Plus Rewards program on your side, it doesn't have to be the only one. By helping you earn and redeem cash back on seed, herbicides, and other eligible products you use throughout the entire season, you can reap the benefits all year round. So contact your retailer to learn how to get more from your crops and put more in your wallet. Bayer Plus. Rewards are always in season.
Find love, then give it all away. Find love, then give it all away.
Call it a day.
One more post.
One more bucket.
There's always one more to be done.
One more field.
To be earned. To be found. For us, it always has been. And always will be. One more bushel.
Your soybeans are in the bin, but the game isn't over yet. Score more points this year by taking your beans to the end zone. If your beans went in the bin at low moisture, you can naturally rehydrate to reclaim lost yield with the End Zone fan control system from Farm Shop MFG. At $10 beans, every point of moisture below your target takes away 15 cents per bushel. That means raising 9% moisture beans to 13 can increase your profits by 60 cents per bushel. Score more yields in the End Zone from Farm Shop MFG.
How much does your crop residue cost you? Over time, residue accumulates in your fields, building excess carbon levels and tying up your plant-available nitrogen. Residue also traps P, K, and micros and can take years to naturally become available to your crops. This is because soil lacks the diverse microbial life needed to break it all down. With Decomp, you can naturally restore life to your soils and allow the release of valuable crop fertility. Learn more at heftyseed.com/naturals.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whenever you want. In your life and on your farm, Case IH AFS Connect gives you more control. Monitor your operation, manage your fleet and your farm data your way. Case IH. Rethink productivity.
Could one of the most profitable pieces of equipment be your computer? In today's Iron Talk, we'll explain how your office computer could add 10 to 20% to your yields this year. I can hear you already saying, a 20% yield increase from my computer? Yep, that's what I said. Now, granted, that's quite a bit optimistic, and it certainly depends on what management steps that you're already taking on your farm. But here's how I got there. On our farm, variable rate planting has shown a 6% return on investment. Planting corn at a higher population in the good areas of the field and a lower population through the lighter soils and lower production acres really makes sense on a couple of fronts. Certainly, you're saving the cost of seed that you'd be wasting by overplanting. But you also gain yield by not underseeding on the good areas. Then we look at variable variety planting, which has been done with drills for years, but can now be done with planters too. Research done at South Dakota State University, Raven, and others has suggested that a yield increase of 10% could be realistic. Now, I can easily see that for some of the fields on our own farm. When you take the simple case of iron deficiency chlorosis, where soybeans visually show interveinal chlorosis or yellowing when soil pHs rise above 7.2 and in high salts, carbonates, or high nitrate level areas of the field. Yields are often cut in half or may even be zero in those areas of the field when planting your high-yield racehorse type variety. Planting the defensive bean across the whole farm has led to 5 to 10% lower yield potential, so it makes all the sense in the world to plant that great defensive bean into the IDC areas of the field and then use the racehorse for the rest of the field. Now, as I've mentioned, it's possible right now to do this, and if you've got variable soils, it may be a great investment for you. To take full advantage of this, you need to be doing grid soil sampling and fully utilizing your yield and fertility maps to create custom plans for each field. Yes, it is possible that your office computer this winter could add 10 to 20% to your yield potential this year. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but before we go, we'd encourage you to check out the Ag PhD magazine. It's called the Ag PhD Insider, and you can learn more at agphdinsider.com.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.